In chapter 25, we're going to lay the foundation for the animal systems that we are going to be going over, just kind of giving a broad overview and some terminology definitions to set us up for the rest of the chapters. If we look here at some of the changes that we see in organisms as they've changed over time. So if we look at some of these different innovations, what we see in animals, the presence of different tissues, we'll see this in plants as well. But where we have different cells working together, some radial versus bilateral symmetry, a solid body versus just kind of having a cavity, non-segmented versus segmented bodies, and then also incremental growth, so from baby to adult versus a molting process in other organisms. Just looking at a few examples of different organisms showing these differences. So sponges, where we see they're multi-cell, but they don't have any tissues compared to our mouse over here, other animals. And in that radial symmetry that we can see here versus a bilateral symmetry where we're kind of split in half, and it gives rise to that special or results in specialization in areas such as the head region that can be differentiated from other parts of the body. And then also this solid body versus the body cavity. So again, we have kind of an opening where those different organs can go versus our planaria over here that was just a solid body. Then moving into segmented versus kind of non-segmented. So again, in the segmented, they're divided into compartments or segments. Here, like we see with our earthworm that's here. However, again, there are no tissues there. So sponges, those types of things. Whereas also the non-segmented, we have room for those tissues that allows them to work together. And of course, growth by molting, we think about different insects, our butterflies, grasshoppers, that type of thing, versus that incremental growth that we see, of course, in humans, but other animals as well, where we're gradually increasing in size. All right, then the organization of the vertebrate body. So our coelom, I know it doesn't look like that's how exactly it's pronounced, but that internal body cavity is called the coelom. And it can be further divided into the thoracic cavity. That's where our heart and our lungs would be versus the abdominal cavity, which comprises of our stomach, intestine, and liver. So as we go through these different tissues and different organ systems, we'll see some of these various cavities. There are four main types of tissues that we'll see in animals. We'll go through each of these, kind of highlighting them. Some of them, especially the muscle and the nerve, we'll be coming back to in later chapters, but kind of a broad overview here in this chapter. So we have epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscles, and nerves. So just knowing, again, what are the functions of these within the body. And kind of a nice summary figure here, if we look first at our epithelial tissues, there are a few divisions of these. So we have columnar epithelium. Here's some stratified, where we have layers of different cells stacked together versus being kind of in a column shaped. We also have cuboidal, so the shape of them, whether it's looking in this cube, again, kind of a column shaped, or these are referred to as squamous, kind of flattened cells that we see here. The nervous tissue, so again, we'll be learning more about neurons in later chapters when we get to the nervous system. Same with our muscle tissue, so we'll be learning more about them. But three types of muscle tissue. We have smooth muscle where it doesn't have striations. Then we have skeletal, which is striated, which are just these lines in them. And then cardiac muscle, which is also has these lines or striations. So again, we'll be learning more about each of those. And then some of our connective tissues, not all inclusive, but things like our bones, blood, loose connective tissue, cartilage is another example. So again, multiple types of each of these tissues. Then our organs Organs are just a group of tissues that are grouped together into a larger, but again, functional unit. So a bunch of different tissues, so muscle tissue, nervous tissue, working together to produce some function. And then an organ system would be a group of organs then working together again to carry out a function. So our digestive system comprises of our, liver, our small intestine, large intestine, all of that makes up an organ system. So just kind of looking at these levels of organization. So we start really at the cellular level. So some different muscle cells here in this example. Then those muscle cells collectively come together to make a tissue, in this case, cardiac muscle. Then those cardiac muscles, along with other tissues, such as fat, other connective tissues, they come together to make an organ, in this case, the heart that is shown here. And then multiple organs come together to form an organ system. So if we think about the circulatory system, so of course our arteries, our veins, the heart, all of those are working together in that organ system. All right, so some of the principal organ systems that we'll be learning more about throughout the semester. So the skeletal system, we won't talk a lot about that in this course, but the circulatory, we definitely come back to the endocrine, which is our hormones, nervous system, how we control our body, the respiratory system. The immune and lymphatic, we'll just kind of briefly mention. We don't have a whole chapter designated to those. Digestive, we'll be back to. Urinary, we won't touch too much on, but then we will spend some time with the muscular system and the reproductive. The integumentary is another one we won't talk a whole lot about. That's mainly our skin, so we won't have a separate chapter on all those. Now, if you go on to an anatomy and physiology course, you'll get to cover each of these in much greater detail. All right, so again, just kind of going over all of these different types of tissues. So starting first with the epithelium, again, knowing the functions. So the three main functions of the epithelium is to protect the tissues from dehydration. So it keeps the water in, keeps them from drying out. It provides sensory system. Of course, we think about the outer layer of our skin, that's epithelium that can detect heat or touch. And then also to secrete materials. So the epithelium lining our gut secretes enzymes, secretes acid to help break down our food. The epithelial cells are divided into three shapes. So we kind of mentioned these already, but squamous are kind of a flattened, cuboidal, like a cube or a square, and then columnar, more of a rectangular shape. And then they can be layered either as a single layer, or they can be stratified to where they have two or more layers of cells. The epithelium does have a lot of regenerative ability, so we lose thousands of epithelial cells a day from our skin as we touch surfaces. Also, our gut epithelial is constantly turning over, so this regenerates often. Kind of focusing on two, again, our simple epithelium. Again, the difference here is just one cell thick, whereas stratified is multiple layers that are stacked. We kind of mentioned that in that figure earlier. We also have what's called pseudo-stratified. So pseudo or false, so it looks like it's stratified. It looks like multiple layers, so it resembles stratified. However, it is only a single layer, so it is actually a simple epithelium. And then again, the cuboidal and those cube shapes, those are mainly going to be found on our glands to secrete various material. And then just a little summary table here that's really nice for putting all these together. Again, excuse me, gives you some examples of their functions, what they look like. We won't be going into great amounts of detail here with these, but definitely being familiar with the different types and what makes them different here. So we see this squamous, again, these are mainly going to be lining. So for example, the lungs, our arteries and veins. Cuboidal, again, those are secretory. So we can see those in various places. The columnar, we'll see those more in the stomach and the intestines, as well as the respiratory tract. Again, then our squamous on the outer layer of our skin is going to be stratified squamous, lots and lots of those letters, unlike the simple ones that we have lining our blood vessels. Then the columnar here, again, this is pseudo-stratified. It looks multi-layered, but it's only one. These are mainly seen in the respiratory tract where they're secreting the mucus, and they also have these little cilia on the outside with the beat back and forth to keep things moving. Moving on to our connective tissue. So we have three main functional categories. So they are used for defending the body, so particularly the immune system, supporting the body, think about our bones and our skeletal system, and then storage and distribution. So our fat cells for storage, blood for transportation or distribution. But all of the connective tissues do share some structural features. They have an abundant extracellular material. So outside of the cells, they don't have a cell wall. No animal cells do, but they have this matrix or this extracellular material called the matrix with widely that's between cells. That's how they kind of connect with each other, but it's kind of this mesh referred to as a matrix. If we look at the immune connective tissues, so these are going to be cells roaming around in the bloodstream that are hunting for microorganisms and also even some cancer cells. Lots of research, excuse me, going into ways to try to activate our immune system to recognize these cancer cells as a way of defending against them. So the main types of immune cells that we see are macrophages. They're kind of the ones that are engulfing or eating the invaders. And then our lymphocytes that will attack those viruses that are actually in the cells, or they can make antibodies against them. Looking now at our skeletal connective tissue, a few different types here. So we have fibrous connective tissue, which are made up of fibroblasts. They're going to be secreting the protein in between cells. Collagen is a good example of one of these fibrous connective tissues. Cartilage, of course, that we have in our nose and various parts of the body that is firm but more flexible, and it also has the collagen that is secreted. Our bones, of course, much stronger, not the flexibility we get with cartilage, but that support that we need. Again, it's a little bit stronger though because the collagen is coated than with a calcium phosphate that makes it more rigid. So they all have collagen, it's just how it's packed together or how it's used. If we look at the storage and transport, again, we already mentioned the adipose or the fat tissue. It's mainly just storing energy, storing fat. And as far as transport, thinking about the blood, so erythrocytes are red blood cells that carry oxygen to cells and carbon dioxide away from them. Again, just a couple tables here, nice little summary tables that can be good for studying. So again, our immune cells, so those macrophages, our lymphocytes that are there detecting viruses or bacteria. Again, the different types of skeletal, so the fibrous tissue, there are a couple of different types. Not concerned that you know all the specifics about each type, but there's loose connective, dense, also elastic or kind of stretchy. We also have cartilage and bone that we see. So again, just a nice little table here to kind of put it all together so that you can see all the different types. And then ending with our storage and transport, so that adipose tissue to store fat and our erythrocytes to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. All right, so if we look just a little bit more at the bone, because that's not one of the systems we'll come back to. So of course, the vertebrate endoskeleton, our skeleton is inside, is strong because of how our bones are made. So it is a dynamic tissue, even though it looks like it probably doesn't really change. It definitely is constantly being reconstructed. We have an outer layer of the bone called compact bone. And then the interior, though, is very spongy. So inside spongy, outside compact. How this kind of constant growth is occurring is we get kind of two stages of bone growth. So first, there are osteoblasts. They're the ones that are building. So think building for blast. They are laying down collagen, increasing the bone. So then the calcium minerals come along and kind of strengthen or solidify those fibers. So then it's laid down in kind of thin concentric layers. So just thin layers made by these osteoblasts. And then the layers form as a series. They also have tubes around a narrow channel called the central canal or the Haversian canal, and that's going to allow blood flow and nutrient flow to provide nutrients to all of those cells. So again, just kind of looking here at the bone, so the outside, that compact bone where it's nice and compact or solid versus the spongy bone that we see on the inside where we have some bigger gaps there. And then the Haversian canal or central canal that we can see here, because as we form these kind of ring structures, it kind of looks like a tree ring, but that's how that bone is laid down. And then those canals are going to allow transport of nutrients and waste out. So this remodeling, again, so the osteoblasts are depositing bone, they're building the bone. Then we have osteoclasts that are breaking down the bone. So blasts build, osteoclasts, maybe calamity is a way to remember it. So they are breaking it down. As we age, though, the backbone and other bones, though, tend to decline in mass. And that leads eventually to a state of osteoporosis, which is an excessive loss. So we have too much activity of those osteoclasts and not enough of our osteoblasts that are depositing new bone. And just a picture here looking at, again, kind of a normal spongy bone that we see here. So this is not compact, but normal spongy bone. But again, osteoporosis, where we see a lot of deterioration and breakdown of that bone. All right, again, with our muscles, we'll be coming back to the muscular tissue later on in the semester, but just kind of hitting some of the highlights. So unlike the collagen that we'd seen with the connective tissue, one of the main fibers, protein fibers we see with muscle, called myofilaments, and they're made up of actin and myosin proteins that build those myofilaments. And then we have the three different types of muscle tissue. So we have smooth that lacks striations, and then skeletal and cardiac that both are striated. Again, our nice little summary tables here. So again, smooth, no striations there. So these are mainly found on the walls of vessels, the stomach or intestine. This is going to be involuntary contractions commanded by the nervous system. So again, we don't have to think about making our stomach send food through it. It just happens, or blood to flow through our vessels. That just happens. Our skeletal muscle, though, that's going to be the voluntary muscle contraction. Again, striations are seen there. And then cardiac, as the name implies, that's a muscle around the heart, and it is also striated. All right, then our nerve tissue, of course, our nervous system conducts and responds to signals, and they do so in a very fast manner. The two main types of cells that we see in the nervous tissue, we have neurons, which we're most familiar with, but then also supporting cells called glial cells, and these are going to help with providing nutrition, support, and also insulating the neurons. So just a little bit about the neurons. Again, we'll be coming back to this when we get to the nervous system. But three main parts of these cells. So they have a cell body where the nucleus is, multiple dendrites. Those are extending out there, receiving the nerve impulses or signals. And then they have a single axon that's a long extension, and that is taking the impulses away from the body. So telling the muscle what to do or the gland what to secrete. All right, just a typical neuron here. Again, we see the big cell body here where the nucleus is, and then lots of these tree-like structures here that are called dendrites, but then just one single axon that is sending that signal away from the cell body, and then it can branch at the end but they're all connected to the same spot or the same axon. And there are three types of neurons that we'll learn more about whenever we get to the nervous system. It's sensory neurons. They are sensing or receiving information in order to respond. Then motor neurons, as it implies, they're telling the body what to do or making it move, so it stimulates muscles or glands. And then we have associative neurons that are more support or integrating, so kind of connecting those two. So sensory are receiving signals going to the brain. Motor neurons are going away from the brain to take that information back to do something with. All right, and then looking at our skeletons, again, we won't really be coming back to the skeletal system, but here again, we have this rigid scaffold that our muscles can attach to make up our skeleton. There are three different types of skeletons we see in the animal kingdom. So hydraulic skeletons, so hydraulic, or kind of thinking about oil and a hydraulic system. So these are fluid-filled cavities encircled by muscles that raise the pressure whenever they constrict. We have exoskeletons, so it's a hard, rigid layer, but it's on the outside, so the muscles attach internally to it. And then, of course, what we have, which is the endoskeleton, which is that rigid internal skeleton for those muscles to attach. And then just a picture here to show those three and some examples. So earthworms have an example of the hydraulic skeleton that has that fluid within them. The exo, thinking about our crabs here, where the muscles on the inside are attached to the skeleton on the outside. And then us, as well as snakes, here where that skeleton is on the inside of the body for those muscles to attach to. And then the skeleton, the endoskeleton, can be further divided into the axial and the appendicular. So axial is kind of the baseline or support, and this comprises only of the skull, the backbone, and the rib cage. And then the appendicular or appendages, these would be all the other bones that are then attached in some way, directly or indirectly, back to the axial skeleton. So these would include the bones of the arm and the leg, as well as some of the girdles that we see, like the pectoral girdle in the shoulder and the pelvic in the hip. And then finally, just a picture here looking at the two. So again, the axial skeleton that we see here kind of in purple, which is the spinal cord, the ribs, and the skull. And then everything else kind of shown here in green, all of our appendages and the arms and the legs, as well as that pelvic girdle and then the pectoral girdle in the shoulder.